Okay, today's guest is Ganga. Oh, Ganga S. Danny, you have to figure out what the S stands for. All right. Podcastle, where are you? Oh, sacre bleu. Why are you so slow? Hello? Wow, this Wi-Fi is slower than a Monday morning meeting. Ugh, okay. Fingers crossed. Let's hope the Wi-Fi spirits are with us today.
The Community Lab, your podcast that connects professional communication research, practice, and people.
Hi, and welcome to the Community Lab. I'm Danny, producer, host, and occasional overthinker, and I'm thrilled you've tuned in for today's lab talk. This time, I'm joined by Professor Ganga Dhanesh from the University of Maryland. I've had the pleasure of bumping into her at a few conferences, and every time, I've walked away thinking, damn, she knows how to connect communication research with what actually matters in the world. Whether it's corporate social responsibility, advocacy, or DEI, her work is sharp, timely, and grounded in making a difference. Oh, and she also told me that she's a fan of the podcast. So, naturally, I had to invite her. Flattery gets you everywhere around here, even though I'm not the orange guy. In this lab talk, we're diving into her research on CSR communication and corporate social advocacy, or how companies can, and maybe should, speak up about socially relevant issues. And get this, we even ended up talking about ancient Greek philosophy. It turns out that the concept of Stoicism might actually help us and organizations navigate the current madness. So, grab a coffee, go for a walk, or just kick back and relax. Whatever your listening ritual looks like. Let's head into Ganga Dhanesh's thought-provoking world of socially relevant research in the field of professional communication. Enjoy!
Hi, Ganga. Welcome to the Community Lab. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Danny. Thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy too, as usual. Before we talk about you and your research on corporate social responsibility in general and corporate social advocacy in particular, let's listen to what ChatGPT tells us about you.
All right.
Ganga S. Dhanesh is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. She earned her PhD from the National University of Singapore and has an extensive background in both corporate and non-profit sectors. Her research primarily focuses on public relations, corporate social responsibility, and its communication. With nearly 2,500 citations, her work has significantly influenced these fields. She serves as associate editor for the Journal of Communication Management and is on the editorial boards of Business Horizons and the Public Relations Journal. Additionally, she played a pivotal role in developing gender stereotyping guidelines for the advertising industry in the United Arab Emirates. In 2023, she delivered a keynote address at the annual Congress of the European Public Relations Education and Research Association, discussing the complexities of public relations in polarized times. ChatGPT views her as a thought leader in strategic communication, whose research not only advances academic discourse, but also provides actionable insights for organizations seeking to communicate authentically and responsibly in an increasingly complex world.
Thanks, ChatGPT. So, Ganga, what are your thoughts on the intro? And I'm very curious, what's your middle name that starts with an S?
First off, I think ChatGPT's done a fantastic job. I don't think I could have written a better intro than that. I particularly like it's highlighting the connection between academia and practice, which I think kind of marks almost all of my work. And yeah, the middle name is Shashidharan. So that's an interesting story because my name is Ganga Shashidharan. But when I entered academia, I figured out people are really going to struggle with citing Shashidharan.
I can imagine.
Yes, so Dhanesh is actually my husband's first name. So I concocted Ganga S. Dhanesh.
Ah,
All my official records are all still Ganga Shashidharan, but my publication name is Ganga S. Dhanesh. I mean, I think Dhanesh is slightly easier for people to cite. So.
oh yeah, I can confirm that. But that's a hilarious story. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Today we are talking about your research in CSR communication in general and corporate social advocacy in particular.
Yes.
Before we do that, I would like to know what sparked your journey into the world of communication research. So was there a defining moment that drew you in?
Danny, there is a long version and a short version of that. What would you prefer?
Let's do the long version, as I'm always interested in the stories.
All right. So my life has always been about looking back and connecting the dots, as Steve Jobs once said.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in high school, I was a science student, but growing up in India, I was pretty clueless about what I wanted to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone told me, why don't you do English language and literature? Just like your mom. My mom is a professor of English.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, yeah, okay, why not? And so for 3 years, I really enjoyed studying literature, and that was fantastic. But after 3 years, I was like, I want to do something more than this. I want to do something. And at that time, MBA institutes were kind of mushrooming all over India.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let me do my MBA. I did that. And within that, I kind of gravitated towards people, so human resources, marketing, advertising. And interestingly, in my first 2 jobs, although it was technically under human resources management, I kept gravitating towards all sorts of comms roles. So much so that when I left both organizations, my bosses called me in and said, whatever it is that you do next, Ganga, please go into communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had taken a break for my first kid, and then that's when I decided to go into academia from the corporate sector. And I had 2 choices. I was like, should I go to a business school and specialize in HR, or should I go to comms and do a comm PhD?
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, for once, maybe I should do what everyone has been saying all along, kind of looking backwards and connecting the dots, whether it was English language and literature or MBA with my work experience, where I kind of crafted my role around internal comms. So I said, all right, let's do communication.
Mm-hmm.
And when I joined the National University of Singapore, my advisor, my PhD advisor, Professor Milagros Rivera, she suggested, looking at my CV so far, why don't you try public relations? And I was like, okay, what's that about?
Mm-hmm.
So I spent about 6 months in the library doing nothing but reading all the PR journals I could find, which was mostly Public Relations Review and Journal of Public Relations Research. And I just fell in love with it. I was like, reputation, relationships, engagement. Oh, this stuff really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, research on CSR was just starting. There was already some research on crisis comm. And because of my practice background, I wanted to do something that would have some applicability in the real world. And that's how I kind of honed in on CSR and crisis. But CSR was just starting. And although in my work experience, we never called it CSR, I kind of realized that what we were doing in both of my jobs had to do with what academia was calling corporate social responsibility.
Sorry, how did you call it in your work?
Honestly, we really didn't call it anything much. It went mostly under employee engagement, employee welfare, because a lot of it was to do with taking care of employees over and above what they were doing at the workplace. Whether it was, taking care of families in terms of offering free vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
We had a scheme where the company had adopted one of the local villages.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it was never called CSR. We never had a CSR wing, but people in HR were doing all of these. So for me, all the dots kind of connected very well together when I came into academia. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been a very organic journey for me, kind of, as my advisor used to say, shining my torch on the first 5 feet in front of me. And then looking back and seeing, hey, now I'm a calm scholar. So, but that journey has been very organic and very natural, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Great. What I'm also interested in is on both the personal and professional level, how do you define communication and why does it matter to you?
Oh, that's a great question, Danny. It's a question that my kids often ask me, what do you do? What do you study in communication? And I keep telling them, I think communication is the lifeblood of society. I mean, without communication, whether it's in the personal space or professional space, nothing will go around.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is really critical for people to understand each other, for people and organizations to adapt to each other, to adjust to each other, and live in relative peace and as much harmony as is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes some of my students ask me in my intro to PR class, public relations and PR and communication is just fluff. And I would say, yeah, it probably seems like fluff to you, but this is the kind of fluff that when you weave together becomes so strong. It's like a pen is mightier than the sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask them, are you aware that some of the actions that you do these days, like whether it's just putting on a seatbelt or choosing to do yoga or making healthy choices or buying a diamond for an engagement ring,
Mm-hmm.
all of these have had well-curated strategic communication campaigns behind them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they are like really surprised. So communication to me makes the world, go around. My kids still think that I exaggerate its importance, but yeah. I'm a total believer.
Great. No, keep it up, please. Now, let's get more specific and talk about your research, shall we?
Yes.
Awesome. So let's start with the basics. Corporate social responsibility. It's a term we hear a lot, but what does it mean in practice? And more importantly, where does communication fit into the picture?
Oh, great starting question, Danny. For me, there are so many definitions of CSR, but even today, I swear by Archie Carroll's classic definition when he talks about CSR being the simultaneous fulfillment, keyword being simultaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously fulfilling a company's economic, ethical, legal, and discretionary or philanthropic responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because Archie Carroll makes it very clear that for a company, you need to be economically viable. That's your starting responsibility to your employees, to your shareholders, to your investors, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You make money, you stay economically responsible while you are following the laws of the land and while you are making ethical choices in all that you do. So it's not just about making money, it's about making money the right way. And then you can decide whether you want to enter philanthropic or discretionary, what he calls the icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's about running a business responsibly and then deciding. It's not just about running around adopting local villages or donating to charities. That is always optional. You see, you need to run your business responsibly and then decide whether you want to do that. So that's the definition I really rock with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In terms of the role of communication in CSR, there are two ways to look at it. One is the strategic approach to CSR talks about doing well by doing good. In that approach, it's not enough if a company is socially responsible, but its constituencies, its stakeholders need to know that it's doing good, right? In order to reap benefits such as better reputation or relationships, organization legitimacy, and so on and so forth. So in that, you communicate your company's good deeds. On the other hand, there is the co-creational constitutive approach, which talks about not just communicating what you've already done, but you co-create what CSR even means to you along with your stakeholders. It's not just the company deciding this is what we're going to do and this is what we have done and we're talking about it. In the co-creational approach, it's like the company and its key constituents, who could be employees, it could be your shareholders, your founders, your managers, your local communities, working together to figure out what does it mean for this company to be socially responsible. So either which way, whether you take the strategic or the co-creational or a mix of both, I think communication is really important in understanding what CSR means for a company. And once you have enacted it, how to talk about it. Yeah, I think that's how I would look at it.
Great. Thank you for these insights. After those definitions, so to speak, I would like to talk about a few studies you conducted. Let's start with one where you highlight how the way CSR messages are framed, how they shape audience attitudes and behaviors. It says that there's a catch. It all depends on how personally invested people are in the issue an organization addresses. So can you walk us through this research and what you found?
Yeah, of course. This was one of the more fascinating studies that I have conducted. My co-author, Elmi Nagmet from the National University of Singapore, and I were really curious about which kind of framing had the most effect on public's attitudes and behavioral intentions. We were curious whether telling a story based on a company's socially responsible activities or just giving a set of facts, figures, and numbers elicited a stronger response. So in both cases, whether we narrated a story, in our case, we took the story of, it was a fictitious company that had helped a boy to become healthy, helping this person to make healthier choices in school and so on and so forth. So it focused on one person's story. The other one was just saying, hey, this company invested in healthy options in schools. It covered so many schools, so many percentage of students participated. Here are the impact figures. Interestingly, we found that both messages are effective. But when you look at more involved publics, for them, fact-based messages are better than stories. Simply because they are so involved in it, they know the topic pretty well, that while, yes, they feel happy and nice when they read these stories, they are looking for something deeper. They are looking for more kind of meat, as you could say. So giving them more fact-based numbers, or facts-based messaging turned out to be more effective than just stories. But that also means, on the other hand, that for a general audience who's not deeply involved in that specific topic, whether it's healthy eating or climate change or whatever, stories would work just as well. And they tend to elicit greater feelings of we call it positive affect, general positive feelings, which can lead to stronger attitudes and behavioral intentions. So that role of involvement was very interesting for us to see that if you are talking to an expert audience, it's not enough to just, give them stories. Give them stories, that's fine, but also give them enough of data and figures.
Fascinating. I'm surprised. For me, it's counterintuitive, but you explained it very well. Another study, so to speak, is you've explored organizational purpose through the lens of hypermodernity. Very fascinating take, in my opinion. I discussed corporate purpose from a CCO perspective with Tim Kuhn in the third lab talk, but I would love to hear your angle on it. So can you break it down for us?
Yeah, of course. This is one of my all-time favorite papers. Actually, you will be familiar with BLEDCOM, the public relations conference that happens in Lake Bled every year.
Yeah.
So one year they had called for, the topic was CSR in hypermodern times. Honestly, that's when I was searching for hypermodernity and I encountered this notion of hypermodernity, which totally resonated with me. So I drew from French philosopher Lipovetsky's articulation of hypermodernity, where it's applied to what is called advanced data-driven societies since the 1980s. So I went through it and I was picking out aspects of hypermodernity that I thought were applicable to an audience who cared for CSR. Because that particular work of mine is titled, Who Cares? Like, who cares for organizational purpose and CSR? Because although we do so much of research in CSR, one question still remains, like, are people really concerned? Because when it comes to buying products that might be seen as more ethically sourced, sometimes they tend to be expensive and you find that it stops with that, right? So I was really curious, and this idea of hypermodernity helped me to answer some of that. And I pulled out around 5 aspects of hypermodern individuals that I thought could apply well to CSR. The first one is that these individuals, and in my reading, although the book talks about societies since the 1980s, which if you map with demographic categorization is probably millennials and after, I like to think of it as a way of thinking. It's a mindset. And so I think it could apply to anyone who subscribes to such a mindset. And so the 5 features of that mindset are, first one is self versus others. Hypermodern individuals, while they are intensely focused on themselves and their own individual pleasure and private happiness, they also show a deep consciousness for the less fortunate. They value a lot of tolerance and respect for others. So it's kind of this both me and we, which I thought was very intriguing. The second characteristic is the difference between material and experiential and emotional consumption. So hypermodern individuals are supposed to be hyper consumers as well, but their consumption is not just material. Like instead of going and buying the latest branded handbag or suit, they might actually prefer experiential consumption, like spending money on travel, on spirituality, on consuming history. So that is also a defining characteristic. The third one is they face extreme levels of autonomy, which means their sense of identity is not derived from what is handed to them through tradition. Like, for example, someone does not say, oh, because I am born Christian or Jewish or Hindu, I am so-and-so, or that I'm from this family. But instead of that, they like to craft their own sense of identity. Who am I? What am I? Is individually crafted in a way that is also hyper, in the sense that they want to have these very exceptional, unique identities. Like someone might say, I am a eco-warrior, I am a minimalist, So crafting their own identities in their own ways, it is to some extent to meet a need for belongingness, but belonging not to an identity that is handed down to them, but belonging to a group that they actively craft their identity around. The next one is obsession with the spectacular. So this hypermodern individual is moved only by hyper spectacles. It's like when my kids always tell me, when I'm about to post a picture on Facebook, especially if it's of my garden or one of my travels, they will say, no, not that one. Like, you have to choose this one. Like, this will create a wow factor. And I'm like, okay. So it's that idea that people are moved only by what is really and truly visually a hyper spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
So the last category is present versus future, which means that the hypermodern individual is intensely focused on the present. They are looking to really live in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but they are also worried deeply about the future. They have crippling anxiety of the future, whether it's related to climate change or financial anxiety, health-related anxiety, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I then take these 5 features and apply it to CSR and say that companies can actually tap into these hypermodern consumers or hypermodern stakeholders. They could be your employees, they could be, any one of your stakeholders,
Mm-hmm.
and create programs that are more experiential in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, donate money to this program we have, if you come up with, say, building shelters for a community that has been ravaged by, say, climate change,
Mm-hmm.
a hypermodern person could see this as helping others while helping themselves, because by engaging in that, they are engaging in experiential consumption. They are engaging in emotional consumption.
Mm-hmm.
It's also helping them to craft their own identity as someone who is a giver or someone who cares for communities.
Mm-hmm.
It helps them to feel like they belong to that community of people who do good, who help others.
Mm-hmm.
They might also then talk about these experiences on their social media in a hyper spectacular way.
Okay.
And this helps them to address, not just live in the moment, but also to some extent address their sense of anxiety about the future because they're doing something about it in the present. So that's the way I kind of draw the linkage between hypermodernity, these specific aspects of hypermodernity that I pulled out, and applied to a set of people who I argue would care for CSR, and therefore companies could target in their CSR communication.
Okay, good. Ganga, now I would like to talk about today's main topic, corporate social advocacy.
Yes.
So it is often mentioned alongside CSR, but the two aren't quite the same. How do you define CSA or corporate social advocacy, and what sets it apart from traditional CSR efforts and their communication?
Yes, that's a great question, Danny, and it's something I have been giving a lot of thought to, because the literature talks about corporate social advocacy as a company taking a public stance on controversial social, political, and environmental issues, even at the risk of alienating some of their stakeholders.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this ties in with other notions, similar notions of brand activism, corporate social activism, corporate political activism, and so on and so forth. But I see CSA as an evolution of CSR. I mean, a lot of literature tries to distinguish between CSA and CSR.
Mm-hmm.
For me, CSA is kind of CSR communication 3.0.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And also, some scholars do consider it kind of on a continuum as an evolution, but with very distinct characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
When I say it is CSR communication 3.0, what I mean is, honestly, the word advocacy and activism, I think, are too strong for what companies are doing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of companies, yes, they do engage in activism, they do engage in advocacy, but not really in the kind of pure sense of activism and advocacy, which actual advocacy and activism organizations actually engage in. I mean, that's not companies' direct line of responsibility. If you look at Archie Carroll's definition, it will kind of come towards the more philanthropic, like, do I want to get engaged in these issues category.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I like to see it as it is an evolution of CSR communication. But again, is it something all companies need to do? Probably not.
Okay. In a recent paper, you took a quite unique approach to CSA by examining or conceptualizing it through the lens of Stoicism and ancient Greek philosophy. So I'm curious, what inspired you to make that connection, and how can Stoic principles help us better understand corporate social advocacy?
Okay, so I have to go back to the days of the pandemic to explain this. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck, I was in Dubai. I was an associate dean at Zayed University in Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those times were really challenging for us with so much going on in the world, so much of change. And the university itself was going through some internal change at that time. And being in a leadership position, going through a crisis situation, I had to turn to something that would help me deal with so much of tumultuous change, both in my personal and professional life.
Okay.
And that's when I encountered Stoicism, particularly Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And as a philosophy, it so appealed to me, particularly in terms of focusing on things that you can control versus stuff that you cannot control. And the stuff that you cannot control was really on the rise at that time, right? Both organizationally and societally.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that gave me a very good framework to deal with matters in my professional life, in my leadership role. And then it was around that time that I started thinking about applying it to even corporate social responsibility, because companies also had to take stands. And this was a time when so much of stuff was going on in the world.
Yeah.
So I thought, why not apply it? And for the UPRERA keynote, that's when I actually crystallized my thoughts around Stoicism for CSR /CSA.
Mm-hmm.
CSA, because CSA was right in the center of everything that's controversial. And that was causing a lot of backlash. Like, you have both friends and foes. If you take a stand, there is one set of brand evangelists, another set of brand antagonists.
Okay.
So Stoicism seemed like a great philosophy to apply to CSA. So that is why I chose Stoicism. More of starting off with personal and professional reasons, and then applying it to my research.
Okay.
So in the paper, I take around 4 ideas from Stoicism and then talk about how companies can use that to decide whether they should take a stance on a controversial issue. And if they do, then how to deal with the backlash if and when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
The idea in Stoicism that I take and applying it to CSR is that Aurelius talks about being morally good. And I kind of draw parallels to being a morally good organization.
Okay.
For me, the good organization is the one that exercises moral authority and then discharges its multiple responsibilities to various societies it's embedded in.
Mm-hmm.
So the first Stoic thought that I take is, I call it on identity. And Marcus Aurelius says, like, what's your vocation? It's to be a good person. Whatever anyone does or says, for my part, I'm bound to the good. In the same way, an emerald or gold or purple might always proclaim, whatever anyone does or says, I must be what I am and show my true colors.
Mm-hmm.
Then I ask, what are the true colors of a company? And I say, you have to turn to corporate identity. What is your corporate identity? What do you stand for? What are the values that drive you? What is your purpose, your motivation, your mission, your vision?
Yeah.
That sense of identity has to be at the base of all that you do in the CSA space.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ben & Jerry's, if you take Ben & Jerry's, if it is to create ice cream, but then it's also about social change. It's embedded in their articulation of identity. So by all means, go and do it. But if your identity is just about making great ice cream, do just that, if it does not align well with your corporate identity.
Mm-hmm.
So my first recommendation is engage in corporate social advocacy if it aligns with your corporate identity and what you stand for.
Okay.
The second one is about circles of control. Like I said, this was a big one for me. And one of the key ideas in Stoicism is that you should act on what's within your circle of control and influence and accept other stuff that isn't. Like, if you can't do anything about it, you can't do anything about it. So one of the quotes that I have used says, some things are in our control while others are not. We control our opinion, choice, desire, aversion, and in a word, everything of our own doing. We don't control our body, property, reputation, position, and in a word, everything not of our own doing.
Okay.
And in another quote, it says, the chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. When drawing parallels to CSA, I ask companies to determine what are your choices within your control? What are these externals that are not? So some of the factors within your control are, for example, crafting your own identity. That's within your control. Ensuring a fit between your brand and the causes that you choose to engage in. That's in your control. To whatever extent you can control a CEO, CEO's political ideology to some extent is within, at least it's internal. The views of your employees, shareholders, all of that can also be kind of, relatively speaking, within your control. According to this Stoic thought, you need to focus on what is within your control. So focus on your identity, focus on aligning your choice of causes with your identity, with your brand, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And then the third idea is on facing obstacles, because in CSA, that's kind of a given.
Yeah.
The quote I use there is one, to have a plan. So it says, life without a design is erratic. As soon as one is in place, principles become necessary. I think you will concede that nothing is more shameful than uncertain and wavering conduct and beating a cowardly retreat. So that's the first one, where we need to have a plan when you enter the space of CSA. But once you have your plan and your principles on how you're going to be guided through implementation of that plan, how do you respond to backlash?
Yeah.
So one of the quotes will say that tranquility can't be grasped except by those who have reached an unwavering and firm power of judgment. The rest constantly fall and rise in their decisions, wavering in a state of alternately rejecting and accepting things. What's the cause of this back and forth? It's because nothing is clear and they rely on the most uncertain guide, common opinion. So the idea here is that you can't be buffeted by these external forces that might rise and fall, but you need to turn internally. However, when you face all this, how do you adapt? According to Stoicism, yes, you should have a plan and you should hold true to that plan. But when you are faced with an obstacle, you can change track.
Okay.
And my recommendation here is to deal with obstacles through recent choice. Not because someone else is saying something, but because you might listen to that and then make changes based on your own reasoning. If you keep listening to one and the next day something else come up, you are just going back and forth. But if you're listening to all of these diverse opinions and then looking back internally and saying, this is my identity, this is what I believe in, maybe I need to change my beliefs, that's fine. But why am I changing it? Because of ABCD. Not because XYZ said that, but because I believe I need to change for whatever reason. That could include feedback from your stakeholders, but not necessarily just jumping erratically to any feedback that comes in, but kind of pondering over all that feedback and then making a recent choice. So facing obstacles through recent choice is the third recommendation I make. And the last one, of course, needless to say, all of this needs a lot of reflection. One of the quotes that I use in the paper, it says, I will keep constant watch over myself and most usefully will put each day up for review. For this is what makes us evil, that none of us looks back upon our own lives. We reflect upon only that which we are about to do, and yet our plans for the future descend from the past. So the power of reflection in crafting your CSR or CSA initiatives is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the idea of reflective practice, which interestingly is an idea that has previously been proposed within public relations research by Betty Van Ruler and Diane Verchich. They talk about reflective practice for public relations. And in another paper, I've built on reflective practice for CSA. But in this paper, I talk about how we need to train our CSR or CSA teams in reflective practice, in the art of reflection before you craft your plans, as you are implementing it, and after implementation. So the need for reflection throughout the campaign planning process is kind of strongly highlighted. So these are the 4 recommendations I give. And I conclude the paper by talking about the move from dancing to wrestling.
Oh.
Because I started by saying that CSR to me is it's like a ballet dancer.
Mm-hmm.
A ballet dancer who's balancing so many simultaneous responsibilities very delicately. But CSA is more like wrestling, like the Brazilian martial art dance of capoeira. Actually, when I presented at UPrERA, someone mentioned this to me. You should try using the metaphor of capoeira. And actually, I think that's perfect, because Marcus Aurelius says the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, because an artful life requires being prepared to meet and withstand sudden and unexpected attacks, which perfectly describes the scenario that companies adopting CSA stances find themselves in. So wrestling as a metaphor kind of better suits CSA than a ballet dance.
Okay, great. So I was a huge wrestling fan when I was a kid, so I'm amazed. Ganga, now I would like to talk about the practical implications of your research, because as you know, research isn't just about theory. It has also real world implications, ideally.
Yes.
Because various governments actually around the globe are, pushing back against, for example, DEI initiatives and other social and environmental programs. So I'm curious, what can organizations do if they still want to make a positive impact? And just as importantly, how can they speak up and communicate their commitment effectively in an increasingly reactionary climate?
Isn't that the $1 million question now?
Yeah, it's a hard one.
I'm actually conducting a series of interviews these days. And yesterday, one of my interviewees said, and this was like an aha moment for me. The question was on DEI, and the person shared, isn't diversity the hallmark of all natural living ecosystems? I was taken aback. I'm like, yeah, true. Yes, right. But I had never really thought of it as being the natural default.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. That's the natural state of affairs. Things being diverse, in any natural living ecosystem is the status quo. Anything else that we are trying to do is not. I think companies to some extent understand this. And going back to the strategic CSR framework, they are also doing a lot of things that they think that their stakeholders want. And for a long time, there has been a lot of demands for companies to reflect the diversity around them, the diversity in their natural ecosystems, which is what companies, I would say, have been doing for a while. Some of them have been doing it for a longer period of time. Some of them kind of stepped up their initiatives due to the triggering events of 2020 in the US with Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too movement, Fridays for Future. I mean, there were a lot of triggering social movements recently, which also reflect some of these social movements back in the 1960s and 70s as well. But irrespective of what drove them, there have always been some version of trying to reflect what your stakeholders want or are in companies.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever pressures, whether it's from governments or other forms of regulatory organizations, I think it still depends on the company to decide, like I spoke about the Stoicism framework, who are we and what do we stand for?
Mm-hmm.
If these values are important to us, if these values are important to our stakeholders, then we need to stand true to that. And I think that's what's reflecting in what's happening around now. Some companies are backtracking, like even before some order came out, they're already running away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas some companies are staying put. They're staying true to their, in Marcus Aurelius's word, their true colors. So I think it's really up to, without passing judgment on any of these companies that's reacting in very different ways,
Yeah.
I think it's important for companies to reflect on their identity, who they are, what they stand for. Again, that's not static, that can change. But that's where reflection comes in. If you are engaging in reflective practice and if your corporate identity is staying true to what you and your closest stakeholders deem it to be, I mean, DEI is just one of the aspects of responsibility. If that is a core value to you, you stick to it.
Yeah.
And in terms of communication, you will talk about it exactly like that, right? You would talk about how these values are important to you. As you can see, a lot of companies right now are just changing the language,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Which is kind of a via media. We are going to be doing what we are doing, but we are not going to use DEI because that's become a loaded word these days. We are going to call it, I don't know, belonging, or, there were some interesting terms around that I've been reading. Which, well, I mean, that's okay. That's just them trying to figure out how to survive as an organization while also meeting the demands from stakeholders and what they stand for.
Okay, good. Your research has already provided many valuable insights, as we just discussed. But looking ahead, what are the big questions that excite you the most? Can you talk a little bit about your upcoming projects or areas you're eager to explore next?
Of course. Like I said, I'm really fascinated to see how companies will actually respond to these changes. That's one thing.
It's so fascinating because Sabina in the first lab talk said she also wants to do research, like similar research. So maybe you can reach out or she will reach out to you and then you can do something together. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Every time I listen to Sabina at conferences or the kind of research we publish, it's interesting that at roughly the same times, both of us, without talking to each other, kind of end up working on similar things. It's uncanny.
Yeah, or like soulmates, research soulmates. I don't know.
Research soulmates. Okay, this is another example of that. So I've been focusing a bit on gender representation recently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when I was in Dubai, the UN Women were setting up they have an outfit called the Unstereotype Alliance, which addresses stereotyping in advertising and marketing content.
Mm-hmm.
And they were setting up the Unstereotype Alliance in the UAE. So I led a team that did research on gender representation in TV ads in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So that got me really interested because my research had some real world impact in helping to inform gender stereotyping guidelines for the ad industry in the Middle East, in the UAE, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I continued that research after coming here as well. Sarah Modlish and I just published a paper on gender representation in corporate social media posts. I'm doing another one that compares gender representation on social media and AI-generated visuals.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll probably continue a bit more on the gender representation side of things. A lot of my work has also looked at internal communication, mostly from a CSR perspective. But one idea that I've been exploring with Laura Lemon from University of Alabama, is this idea of employee disengagement.
Mhm.
That's really fascinating. So that we're doing a set of interviews around that, and I'm really curious about what we will find. And the last area, of course, well, no one can shy away from doing research on AI. So I am presenting a paper at BloodCom on AI and CSR communication, more like a theoretical framework, which I'd like to develop a bit further.
Mhm.
I'm a bit hesitant to do empirical work on AI at this stage because things are changing so fast.
Mhm.
I'd rather wait and see how things are developing and then to say, how can we enhance a CSR communication framework using AI capabilities? I mean, mostly Gen AI capabilities. So that I am interested in kind of fleshing out a bit more as we kind of go along the AI journey.
Okay, great. It's quite diverse what you have on your plate. Sometimes I find it quite challenging when you conduct research on several topics. I mean, in your case, they're quite related, but not 100%. So I very much look forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been one of my PhD advisor used to call it my research rainbows. So I would go to her with 101 ideas and she would say, well, Ganga, finish your PhD, focus, and then you can go chasing your research rainbows.
Mhm.
Eventually, my key strand of research has been CSR and CSA, but I've also been chasing my research rainbows. I think it keeps things fresh for me.
I agree. When you have the possibility to do that, then let's go for it, of course. Okay, good. Ganga, we are close to the finish line here. However, before we wrap this lab talk up, I, as always, will torment you a little bit with our quick fire round.
Yeah, your dreaded quick fire round.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, then let's go.
The quick fire round.
What's something you've always wanted to try but haven't had the chance to yet?
Oh God, that does sound like overthinking.
You can think a little bit.
Yeah, maybe explore the Amazon. I love nature, and I think that would be the ultimate experience.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. It seems like every guest likes nature, and I'm so afraid of insects. And I always think like I'm getting sick or something, like getting malaria like around the corner. So, but yeah, I love it. If you had to pitch your research as a Netflix series, what would be the title and tagline?
I think it would be Finding Happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I can answer that in a heartbeat because I have been thinking about it. Not as a Netflix series, but as a book. Like if I want to write a book that resonates with a lay audience, I think it would be Finding Happiness. But I would pitch it like, what can companies and people do? Because CSR is like articulating a company's role in society, right? And how does that contribute to finding happiness for everyone involved?
Question number 3. If you weren't a communication scholar, what would you be doing?
I will probably be a gardener. I love gardens. Not gardening per se. I think I like to call myself a garden designer because I'm more about arranging stuff around and making things look really nice. So yeah, I would be a garden designer.
What's the strangest or most unexpected reaction someone has had to your research?
I think except for people, especially family, always wondering what I do, I don't think there has been anything very strange or unexpected. But my kids are forever wondering, what on earth do you guys do in communication? Other than that, I don't think I have had any very different of strange reactions.
What's one myth about CSA or CSR that you wish people would stop believing?
I don't know whether this is a myth, but the The idea that you have to do it, I think, is just not right. You don't have to. Just because people are taking stances, you don't have to jump on the bandwagon. It has to be a deeply thought through, reflective process where you have checked in with yourself and seen whether this reflects who you are as a company, and then only take a stance. But jumping onto the bandwagon just because it's the flavor of the day, just because everyone else is doing, if you can call that a myth, that's something that should definitely be dispelled, because that just spells nothing but trouble for organizations.
Okay, so that means if your identity is being a corrupt jerk, just be a corrupt jerk.
It's so interesting that you said that, because one of the reviewers for my paper actually spoke about that. And that's when I said, well, the first Stoic thought is about being a morally good organization. You see?
Okay.
That's how I clarified it and said, the very first one talks about what is your vocation, as Marcus Aurelius, and says to be a good person. So the whole idea of Stoicism is that you need to be virtuous, that you need to show the cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control. That's the starting premise, that you need to be a good person, and in drawing parallel to the idea of the good organization, one that exercises moral authority, the morally responsible firm. So that's the starting point. And then from there, you expand into ideas of identity and all of that.
Thanks for the clarification. Now I know what you're talking about, or I pretend to know.
All right.
Good. That's a wrap up for today's Lab Talk. A big thank you, Ganga, for sharing your story and your expertise on CSR and CSA and the challenges of speaking up for social causes in today's turbulent times. Thank you so much, Ganga.
Thank you so much, Danny, for having me. That was a great conversation. I enjoyed it. And once again, congratulations to you for hosting this podcast. I think this is really important to connect academia and practice. So great work on what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Ganga. I really appreciate it. And sorry for the bad internet connection.
Oh, no problem at all. This was fun. Thank you so much.
That was the Lab Talk with Ganga Dhanesh. As always, I hope today's episode helped you stretch your communication muscles a little further. I, for one, was reminded that even at the university, the internet connection can have a mind of its own. But thanks to the wonders of editing, the glitches have vanished, mostly. We've also learned an important lesson. Organizations don't need to speak out on every social issue just to score points. In fact, if it's not authentic, maybe just don't do it. The key takeaway: know your values, uphold them, and communicate them sincerely. And if your intentions are shady, maybe just zip it. If you want to know more about Ganga's brilliant research, check out the references in the show notes. Follow the Community Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podcastle. Subscribe on YouTube and tap that little bell so you never miss a Lab Talk. And hey, if you like what you hear, give it a like. So let's feed that algorithm beast together. Want to stay in the loop? Connect with us on LinkedIn. And as always, your feedback, shares, and word of mouth support mean the world to me and the Community Lab. In the next Lab Talk, I'll be sitting down with Professor Julian Mirabel from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. We will talk about positive communication and why leaders in particular need to master the art of being clear, kind, and empathetic. Until next time, and don't forget, communication is everywhere. It's in what you say, what you don't, and sometimes even in how someone imposes a tariff on an island inhabited by penguins. Stay curious and keep the conversation alive.